What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are on episode 53 of the show. Last week, I was speaking about the mindset that you need to overcome missing out on those really big opportunities in life. And this week, I'm going to be changing gears a little. I'm going to be introducing you to a really good friend of mine who just happens to be an amazing business coach and mentor. Now, Daniel Priestley is he's an extremely successful entrepreneur. He's managed to go and build not just a big business, but a global business. He's operating in 3 different continents, and the business name is Dent, as in to make a dent in the universe. Now, he is an author. He has 4 best-selling books on entrepreneurship. The first one I read was called Key Person of Influence, which I learned about on a podcast that he did with somebody else a couple of years ago. And as I am known to do occasionally, I went straight to Amazon and downloaded the book and had it read cover to cover within, a few hours. And what I learned in that book was so kind of interesting and so powerful for me that I immediately kind of looked up the more about Daniel, and I learned that he had a program in London called KPI, which helps you create a personal brand. Basically, it's called the KPI Brand Accelerator. So I went ahead and I joined up and I did that program. And fast forward 2 years, here I am with my own podcast, having my own conversation with the author himself, with Daniel. And let me just say, there are so many useful nuggets in that book. It's just incredible. You have got to go and pick yourself up a copy of that book. It is definitely in the top 5 of business book recommendations that I would give. Now, given I tend to cover real estate on this podcast, some of you are going to be wondering why I've brought somebody like Daniel in, because Daniel is not involved in property in the industry at all. But he is an incredibly successful businessman. And as I am well aware, and as you guys will learn, if you're not already aware, building a successful real estate business is not just about real estate. There are so many other important aspects that you've got to get right. And the areas that Daniel covers are branding, positioning, sales and marketing, supply and demand, tension, building interest in products or stuff that you're selling. And Daniel is just a genius around all of this stuff. So you really got to pay attention today. Now, I've put a number of links to his books and his accelerator program in the show notes. If you have any interest at all in growing your business, then I strongly recommend you pick up a copy of the book Key Person of Influence as soon as possible. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Mr. Daniel Priestley. Daniel Priestley, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Lovely to be on your podcast.
It's great to have you here. And where does this podcast find you? Where are you at the moment?
I am in the same place that I've been for the last 18 months, which is in my home. Hardly leaving the neighbourhood ever.
Oh wow! Okay.
London.
Well, yeah. And that's around London, isn't it?
Yeah, near Wimbledon.
Yeah, because people are going to be picking up on that accent and thinking he's definitely not from
he doesn't sound like someone from London. Although in London, I do sound like someone from London. People from all over the place. But I was born in Australia. I left Australia when I was 26, and then I've lived in London ever since, so about 15 years.
Okay, wow. And whereabouts in Australia were you from?
Well, I kind of did retirement first in my life. So I grew up in a place called Mooloolaba, which is a place called the Sunshine Coast, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is just endless sunshine and beaches and forests, and it's just basically the most beautiful location you could possibly spend time in. It is just miles and miles and miles of beaches.
Wow, sounds pretty idyllic for a childhood anyway.
Yeah, I took it very much for granted, but now that I live in London, I kind of do have pangs of walking on the beach more often.
Yeah, I can imagine. And in terms of, I mean, we're going to get into a lot of the different things today. I mean, obviously, COVID, the impact, and because the last time you and I met person to person was actually one of your events in London in 2019. I think it was the event that JP started speaking for the first time after his terrible accident. And
And that was actually our last major event.
was it really? Okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing how things have changed. So we'll get into all of that, but just for the purpose of the audience that there'll be some people here that won't know who Daniel Priestley is. Can you just kind of give us a bit of a backstory? I mean, you've told us you're from Australia, but just a little bit of your late teens, 20s, kind of what.
So from 19 to 21, I was employee number 3 at a fast growth startup, and we grew to about 60 people in 2 years while I was there, and about 6 or 7 million of revenue. I was taken under the wing of the founder, who was 37, 38 at the time. And basically I was his kind of dog's body, right-hand man, shadow. So everything from picking him up and dropping him off at airports, licking stamps and sending out physical mail, making cold calls, making warm sales calls, weekend meetings because that was the only time we could meet, finding an office, relocating, like basically everything. So it was kind of, strangely, I would almost describe it as an entrepreneur apprenticeship. Like it was very much like doing entrepreneurship, but without the risk for those 2 years that we went through that. So at the end of 2 years, I had actually set up a sideline division of his business. His main business was in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. I'd set up a sideline in Bendigo, Ballarat, Cairns and Hobart, just a regional, basically copying what was happening in the main cities in regionals. It only did 700,000 of revenue, but it was very profitable. It did about $250,000 of profit. So it was a lot more profitable percentage terms than the big city business. And I was super pumped when I saw the P&L, and I went to him and said, John, I've just made you $250,000. Can I get some shares in the business? And he said, Daniel, if you want shares in a business, you should go start your own. And I was like, oh, okay, wow. The following day, I think it was, I got dragged into the CFO's office, who had been brought in to kind of grow the business up. And she sat me down over a coffee and said, basically a speech along the lines of, Daniel, you're not special.
All right. One of those.
Yeah. And then about a week later, I got a bonus of $500 for making the company $250,000. So
writing was on the wall.
It was like slap, slap, slap. And I put the $500 as a bar tab behind a bar and invited all my friends out, and we got nicely intoxicated. And the following day I woke up with a hangover, and I remember going for a long walk and sitting on a bench just looking at the river. And I decided to quit my job and go and start up in competition, and basically start my own business. So John's advice, if you want shares in a business, go start your own. I kind of went, you know what, I'm going to go do it. So at 21, I started my own company. It became a fast growth startup, 0 to $1 million in the first year. By year 3 to 4, we were doing 11 million.
Wow, fast growth. Wow.
Yeah, very fast growth. And
what was this sector that you were in? I mean, you went into competition with your former employer, basically.
Yeah, it was basically, essentially, it was a hybrid of being a marketing agency focused on event promotion. And it was, I guess you would say, an event promotions business. And we would do roadshows, in particular for when we hit our peak, we were doing roadshows for franchises, and we were roadshowing them around Australia, finding their franchisee networks, and basically taking risk and also taking reward for signing up franchisees. So we would coordinate. The big contract that made the most money was a contract to put on 270 live events to promote a new franchise. And basically, we rolled that out across Australia. We had upside commission on every franchise. We actually took the risk on some of the overheads and costs. So we're in partnership with a company, and we became their marketing engine.
Right. Right.
We were,
Profitable. Yeah.
very profitable. Yeah. Mind you, we did another one. We did a DVD vending machine at the last possible moment that would have been a good idea. Like, it was the idea of video streaming at that time was not really a thing, but obviously, anyway, we did a contract around that. We did a latex mattress sleep system. Anyway, we were rolling out, doing road shows up and down Australia, taking percentage, taking ownership, and basically it was a very lucrative business. We found hot products and we ramped them up. So I'd made a bit of money at 2005, and I wanted to travel. Got the opportunity to come to London and bring an international speaker to London. I turned up in London. I'd never been above the equator. I put on a dinner party for all the top influencers that I could get my hands on in London. 28 people showed up to the dinner. 26 of them decided to do a joint venture partnership with me to launch a new business in London. And we did 800 grand in the first 3 months. So we did, just burst into the scene and
can we just go back there? How do you arrive in London from your first time and organize 28 people to come to a dinner party? Just take us through some of that process.
Yeah, so essentially, there was a website at the time that was a precursor to LinkedIn called Academy.
I remember that. Yeah.
I later ended up being the managing director and buying it and actually owning it. But at the time, basically, I arrived in London and the biggest online network was Academy. And it ranked people by how influential they were and how many people were following them. And, similar to today, obviously, with followers and that sort of stuff. So I got in touch with the owners of Academy, Thomas and Penny, and I said, I'm in London, and what do you think I should do in order to launch my business? And Thomas said, well, why don't you put on a dinner party for the top people on Academy? And I said, great idea. So I literally hired a restaurant, a private dining area, and I said, Thomas, will you come and I'll cover your dinner? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And then I thought, I'll just cover everyone's dinner. So I just got in touch with people and said, look, Thomas is going to be there. So I had one influential person there. I said, Thomas will be there, and I'm covering dinner and wine. So do you want to come along and have a nice dinner and hang out with the most influential people on Academy? And they all said yes. They all had big email databases. So pretty much everyone I spoke to had an email database of 10,000 and up. And then that was essentially the first, out of 28, I did 26 JV partnerships. So on the night I walked around with my diary. I had the following 2 weeks free. Obviously, I'd just arrived, and I basically walked in. We had coffees and did deals.
Interesting. And did you have a partner at the time?
So I did it under the same brand as my business in Australia, and we did have an earn-in with one of the people in the business who was earning his way into that business, but his earn-in was based on running the Australian business.
Okay, I get you. And do you still have an involvement with that, or did you sell it, or did it all?
So here's what happened. The business grew very successfully. We got up to about 4 million in revenue going into 2008, 2009, the global financial crisis. Our revenue was coming from two main sources. We were bringing one guy in from the US, and we were his UK promoter. And we're bringing one guy in from Asia, and we were his UK promoter. So we essentially had two major contracts and doing about 2 million a piece with each contract. And we were very profitable. We were a great company, and having lots of fun running big events. We ran events up to 3,000 people, and lots of fun, lots of AV. We hired out the London Palladium Theatre one time, which is a £32,000 venue hire. Just all sorts of fun stuff. And we were, still pretty young, 27, 28 sort of thing, and having a great old time. And then the global financial crisis hit. And a couple of things happened. That my contract in the US was paid in US dollars, and if you remember at the time, the pound tanked against the US dollar, and it basically made that particular product 30%, 35, 40% more expensive. And at a time when the market's dropping and the cost is going up, So I had to cancel it. I basically said, we're not going to run those events anymore. And then the Singapore company that I was working with, they went into a bit of a spiral down, and he decided he didn't want to come to the UK anymore. So I was basically productless.
Right.
So hired a consultant, tried to sell the business, got an offer for £300,000, 150 grand and 150 grand in a year. And I was just shocked. We'd done 4 million. We'd done 4 million with 600,000 profit. And the shell of the business with no product was theoretically worth 300 grand. Anyway, on the day of exchanging the money, the guy actually had a heart attack and went into hospital.
No way.
He didn't pass away, but he didn't do the deal. And anyway, I spoke to the consultant. I said, "Why is this business not worth anything? Like, why have I built it? Why have I spent several years building something that isn't actually marketable?" He said, "Oh, that's easy. That's because you're a brokerage. You're essentially, you don't own the value. You're kind of like a car yard selling cars for BMW and Audi, but you don't really own anything. You're just a basic car yard." So the
broker fees and stuff instead of the actual, yeah.
He said, "Look what happened to the business. As soon as you couldn't broker something, your entire business stopped." So I said, "Well, what's the answer to that?" And he said, "Well, you've got to own assets. You've got to become a software business or an intellectual property business. You've got to own something as opposed to being a brokerage model business." So what was great is we went fishing through the whole business to look for intellectual property and potential for media and what could we own. And part of the intellectual property was this idea called key person of influence, which was essentially my observations working with super highly paid authors and speakers for the last 10 years. And I wrote the book Key Person of Influence, and basically started bedding down and formalizing my own intellectual property. And it was only, I think, a year and a half later that we raised money at 9 million valuation. So raised £450,000 at a £9 million valuation. And it's funny,
for the same business, is it,
we morphed the business. So
right.
The old business was called Triumphant Events. Triumphant Events, we morphed into what we called Intrivo, which stood for Entrepreneur Revolution, but no one could say it, spell it, or remember it. So we rebranded to what is today Dent.
Right.
And make a dent in the universe. So we went through a few little learning cycles, but ultimately we ended up with a much, much more valuable company. And today we're a global business, office in London, Sydney, and Toronto. We've got what's called a shared services division. We own our own film production, our own book publishing, our own IT services company. So we're quite a sizable business now. We do acquisitions. We're very profitable. We're fast growth. And not only that, we don't really rely upon anyone else outside. So we're not a brokerage in any way. We run our own product. If you want our product, you've got to come to us for it. So it's a much, much, much better business. Yeah. And then last year, we also spun out a technology company. So we found a piece of technology sitting inside the business, which was some software that we developed for ourselves. We've spun that into its own business, and we just raised money at 6 million valuation.
That scorecard app, isn't it? Yeah.
Score app, yeah. So that's just a new little sideline business. So I guess you could say, yeah, my background is very entrepreneurial, and also learning in the streets. Had I had someone explain to me how to build a proper business, I probably would have gotten a lot further in the first 10 years. But we've played catch up since.
You've done a good job of that, that's for sure. I was just going to ask you, I mean, throughout that process there, what would you say was the biggest mindset shift between, I suppose it sounds as if it was the fact that you're holding assets.
Yeah, the biggest mindset shift was, it's what today I describe it as recognizing the mountain of value that you're standing on. And I use a metaphor that if you climb a mountain and you're standing right at the summit of the mountain, you can see everything but the mountain. You can actually, look across the horizon and see other mountains. You can see lakes and rivers and streams and forests, but you can't see the mountain that you're actually standing on. And the mindset shift is when you suddenly realize, oh, wait a second, I know some stuff and I've got some potential right close. I don't have to go and pursue Bitcoin or funnel hacking or some cool new thing. I've actually got incredible amounts of value right beneath my feet. And that was very much a wake up where I realized that the most valuable asset in the economy is called intellectual property. And intellectual property very easily turns into media, and media turns into software. And essentially, if you can identify your intellectual property and then transform that into media and software, you end up with an extremely valuable company very quickly. It's a very repeatable process, and you can actually capture a lot of the value. So that's, those were some of the key lessons about the actual process of turning ideas into equity value.
In terms of, I mentioned that this is typically a property related audience. You don't have any role in property investing or anything like that.
Not in a business sense. I hold property, but not. I'm not a property entrepreneur per se, or a developer or anything like that.
Do you think the property sector is ripe for the kind of stuff that you're talking about, IP and all that kind of stuff?
I think it's a very complementary business. I think if you can take cash flow from business and put it into property, that's a pretty solid strategy for multi-generational wealth.
It's a good store of wealth, all right, for sure.
Yeah, the issue that I have with property is extremely low yielding in most cases. If you buy a property and you can genuinely walk away with 3% yield, you've done pretty well. People say, "Oh, I know how to get 10% yield," and they're like, "Okay, but how much of your time is going into that?" Because if we put a value on your time, you're not getting a 10% yield. You're getting a 3% yield, and 7% is your time.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see people who they go, "Oh, I know how to get much higher yields," and I go, "Yeah, but you're taking extraordinary risk with capital." And ultimately, there's no way around it. Property has become very highly inflated, and the yields can't. The equity values can go much higher than the yields. So it's become less attractive from that point of view. But the opposite is true for intellectual property businesses. So, for example, let me give you a high-level example because I know your listeners are actually quite advanced. You can develop a piece of software for say 50 to 60,000. You can then further develop it for another 200,000. So you could be all in on a piece of software that you've built for less than 300,000. And that SaaS product could be something that you quite easily get 1,200 users at £60 a month or something like that. That business is then now spitting off 50, 60,000 a month, and you've only spent 300,000 in development. So
6 months repay, yeah.
You've got, obviously it requires skill, but everything requires skill. It's pretty extraordinary when you look at it from that point of view. 300,000 invested, 50 grand a month cash flow.
Yeah.
Mind you, let's be real. It's probably half of that in cost, but it's absolutely doable. Absolutely doable.
And then the multiple is much greater than a real estate.
Yeah, 4 times. You'll get a 4 times. Once you hit 5 million in revenue, you will definitely get a 4 times cash value, 4 times revenue valuation. So if you can be doing 5 million of revenue in a SaaS business, it is worth 20 million.
I was going to move on to just COVID and the impact that it's had. I mean, when I attended your KPI Brand Accelerator back in 2019, I think it was probably one of the last sort of cohorts that went through with the person-to-person event. Can you describe like the shift that you've had to go through with your business? Because it was a very well-oiled machine that brought in guys every kind of couple of months, and that all of us obviously has all been kind of turned on its head in January or March of last year. Can you tell us what you've had to kind of repurpose the business?
Yeah. So the first thing I did, having been in business through the global financial crisis, the first thing I did when it struck, is like as soon as the first case was in the UK, I cancelled all my office buildings. So all my offices, we cancelled our leases. Some of them we had 3-month notice, some of them we had 6-month notice. But I knew that if China was going to shut down, then
The rest of the world was following. Yeah.
It was going to, and I also knew this was not going to be some small thing. This was going to be a global thing. So I immediately cancelled those offices. I just cancelled I cancelled all my credit cards so that every expense had to be rationalized. So basically, as soon as you cancel your credit cards, all the companies start knocking on your door saying, "Hey, can we get you to re-sign up for this?" So that was great. And then as soon as the government announced furlough, I put everyone on furlough and then started bringing people back as I needed them.
Right. Okay.
So I ran the business with a few of the contractors, and all employees went onto furlough. So we were super decisive right from the outset, because I'd been through the global financial crisis, and I knew that when that rug gets pulled, you want to basically change gears with the
overnight. Yeah.
So I very much turned on a penny, and that meant that we preserved cash, and I was very upfront with the team. Here's how we're going to play this out. Here's how it's going to work. And the team appreciated the honesty and the decisiveness. And then we sort of had to rethink, for 10 years we've been running as an events business. And then we said, well, we're not really an events business, we're an intellectual property business. So we relaunched the business as a delivered online Zoom, live streaming, live interaction workshop, but with one little change. And the one little change is that rather than having a full day together in a room, which is very much dictated by the idea that if everyone's going to turn up to a venue, they don't want to turn up for half a day, they want to turn up for a full day. But with Zoom, it's actually just as easy to run a 3-hour event, and that's actually not fun to do 9 hours on Zoom.
Yeah,
right?
I can totally relate to that one. Yeah, for sure.
So what we did is we just broke the program down. Rather than doing it in days, we just broke it down into 3-hour chunks, and suddenly the outcomes of the program went through the roof, because people love to learn in 3-hour chunks, and they learn and then they go do, and then they learn and they go do, and they learn and they do. And we actually started getting much better results from the clients, because we could just not overwhelm people with content in a full day. The other thing that happened is we built these online dashboards where we could actually see people doing the work. We have a master sheet that I have as my dashboard, and everyone who's doing the work is actually filling in their sheet as we're going. So I can just glance at one screen and actually see who's struggling, who's doing well, and I've got a team behind the scenes now who can kind of highlight things as green, yellow, or red. So let's say we're putting together a pitch. We're going through and breaking that pitch down, and I can see 60 people, and we can go through and say, that's green, that's green, that's green, that's green, that's yellow, that's red, and it basically shows up for people, and they go, oh, okay, I better up my
get the socks up, pull the socks up.
Yeah. So it's a level of feedback and a speed of feedback that we could never do in person. So
you've made it work for you actually.
It's hugely improved the program. And not only that, we now have clients all over the world. So
yeah, because the time zone kind of thing is gone. Yeah,
we've got clients. When I start a workshop, I typically say, "Where are you?" And it's Oslo, and it's South Africa and Estonia and Amsterdam and Scotland and Ireland, and basically all over the time zone. You used to fly in, didn't you?
I flew in every single month, and it was, and I kind of, in a sense, I enjoyed it, because it was a full day that I would just turn off the phone and basically devote to the content upload that we were going through. But I kind of thought to myself, if it was a 9-hour Zoom call, I don't know if I could have handled that, because it's too much to take on in a screen. You need that kind of personal interaction, and going out for a walk, for lunch with somebody, and having a chat and catching up. So it sounds like it's been a much improved thing, and actually a lot easier than flying in and having to kind of stay in a hotel overnight. I had to stay. I couldn't get an early flight that would make the program in the morning, so I decided to stay the night before. And then at 5:30, when it was finished, I was like straight to the airport, quick, to try and get out. So it was, it was kind of a bit of a handful. So it does sound like a big improvement now.
Yeah. So we've used it to our advantage.
Yeah, and tell me this, you mentioned that you've cancelled all your office leases and stuff. When the pandemic is over, do you see yourself going back to an office, or do you see, continuation of what you're doing now?
I can imagine that we'll probably have a hot desking office, but probably one third the size. Most of my team are actually very happy working from home, and a small number of them would rather work in the office. And what we'll probably do is have access to some boardrooms, and we'll do every 2 weeks. We'll actually do a half day together in the boardroom, and kind of sync up around that sort of stuff. Or we'll get the team together, for reasons, good reasons why we need to get together. But we have actually fallen into a good rhythm now of having our whole team just, we have our team meetings on Zoom and all of that.
And how do you keep the kind of the corporate culture aspect of it going in a remote environment like that?
We use several habits, key habits. So the first habit that we have always had is a 90-day reset. So the 90-day reset is where we get the whole team together every 90 days, and we essentially celebrate what we've achieved in the last 90 days, and we set ourselves up for the next 90 days. We talk about the 3-year vision, the 1-year mission, and the 90-day milestones. And every single person has to walk away from that 90-day reset with their own dashboard. So on the dashboard, we call it the sleep at night metrics. So what are the main things that allow you to know that you are doing a great job and you can just sleep at night? Go to sleep at night knowing that you're doing great. So what key metrics are happening? And every single person has to be part of an asset sprint. So every 90 days, everyone on the team is also creating new assets in the business as part of their role as well. So that all gets set up as the 90-day sprint. Then we have our weekly meetings. So a quick briefing in the Monday morning and then a debrief on Friday afternoon. So those quick meetings kind of make sure that we're just into a good rhythm of together, and we do those on Zoom as well. And then the next thing we do is have transparent dashboards. Everyone's got a dashboard, so everyone can see everyone else's dashboard as well. Right. So it's very clear what people are working on and whether they're hitting their goals. And the dashboards are there for everyone to see. So we've got a company dashboard, a regional dashboard, and then individual dashboards. So that's nice. And then the next two things is about communication. So making sure that we're always communicating through Slack, and we're trying to avoid WhatsApp groups and trying to avoid getting on, we want to keep the communication to as few channels as possible so that you always know where communication happened. You don't
Focused,
yeah. You don't want to be sitting there going, did I message you that on Instagram yesterday, or did I send you an email, or how did I send that folder? And then the final part is just making sure that we're good with tech stack. So making sure that we keep our technology well organized, that we're using the best tech, that we're exploring better and new ways to utilize technology, and that we're just keeping our files and our folders nicely organized and up to date. So those are the big 5 habits. And actually, if you get those 5 habits right, you can actually get a lot done without having people physically in the same room.
Yeah, no, I can see how that, like, it's the well-oiled machine metaphor that I just gave. It's I can see actually how that, pulls everyone forward kind of at the same time. And I wanted to ask, I mean, obviously you've moved now online, but I have a feeling that when online events are allowed, or when physical events are allowed, that there's going to be a preference for them in some ways, because the energy that you get from an online versus an in-person event. Do you see yourself going back to kind of a hybrid of both, or what would you see the future there?
I see that for us, the future of physical events will be, we used to run a lot of physical events for our potential clients, so our prospects. And, we'd have 400 people in a concert theatre as a way of people to have a first experience with us and get to know us and sort of see what we're all about. And that was very successful for us. We do it twice a year in each time zone and kind of in each city that we're in, and that would work quite well. I think what we're going to do is drop those But what we will end up doing is retreats with clients. So rather than running physical events for the people who don't know us, we'll run physical events for people who really know us.
For the small few that know you
Yeah,
well.
so I would love to do stuff like take 40 clients to Morocco and have a 4-day retreat where we do, we get to know each other better, we hang out, we spend time by the pool, we do conference talks, we have some potentially some like competitions and, just kind of have a really cool 4-day retreat to learn and to develop and have a focused outcome. But also, just not only will there be a focused element to it, there'd also just be a fun element to it. And everyone knows that everyone else speaks the same language and has a similar status or achievement level. And I can see us doing a lot more of those.
Yeah. That sounds like a really good one, all right, because I'm already thinking about, geez, I wouldn't mind joining that when it's when it's available. Tell me this, in terms of, I mean, we were talking before we started the record that you have 3 kids, I have 5. Raising kids, I mean, first of all, let's start back to your father, Andrew, is he's a business coach as well. So how much of his occupation would you say rubbed off on you growing up?
When I was growing up, he was a school teacher.
Oh, okay.
He was
Interesting.
always a teacher around my school or a nearby school, and it was actually around the same time when I was just finishing school and getting into working in a startup myself. It was only about a year earlier that he became a business coach. So we kind of were both, in that sense, we were both learning at the same time. But obviously, Dad has always had a massive interest in computers. He's had a huge interest in marketing. He was a desktop publishing business for a while. He's always had graphic design and those things. He's had a few side hustles actually as a school teacher. So I definitely picked up an entrepreneurial spark from Dad. Mum's a journalist, so I picked up my love of writing from her. He wasn't necessarily a business coach for most of my childhood.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I mean, you've co-authored a book with Jodie Cook on raising entrepreneurial kids. Can you give us a couple of suggestions on the way to kind of go about that? I have 3 teenagers that I'm trying to kind of talk it up about, starting, a little side hustle for them and get them interested in this process.
Well, the schooling system is a great system that's done a great job for a couple of hundred years, and we can pretty much thank the schooling system for the middle class in the industrial age. It was really a way to elevate the vast majority of people in the beginning of the industrial age. The vast majority of people were factory fodder at best, farm labor, and the schooling system came along and actually upskilled huge numbers of people. And created essentially a middle class. A lot of people are like, the schooling system doesn't teach you about how to manage money and how to become successful and doesn't teach you life skills. It's like, yeah, well, it wasn't really meant for that. It was meant to create a middle class who could, get a middle job and the rest is up to you. But with that said, something has shifted in the last 10, 20 years where the schooling system is kind of preparing kids for a world that doesn't really exist anymore. So there are no careers in the local 10-mile radius. There is no major employer down the road who's looking to hire you for 10 years at a time and those sorts of things. It's very rare that someone actually has a career that kind of unfolds the way that the schooling system kind of thinks it should. Even good jobs like doctors and nurses and fire and police and all those kind of things, they're not even funded the way that they used to be. So essentially, you've got to acknowledge that many of the skills that will take someone through their career are kind of entrepreneurial skills, pitching ideas. In a fast-paced world, you're going to have to adapt and pitch, and you're going to have to come up with new ideas and products, and you're going to have to be okay with things changing pretty rapidly. And all the stuff that entrepreneurs kind of deal with, most people in their careers are going to have to start thinking that way. So first thing I'll tell you about the book is that it's not about trying to turn kids into entrepreneurs. Childhood's should be childhood. It should be a fun time to be a kid. But it's about introducing them to entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial ideas. So little things like asking kids, what does this shop sell? And why do you think people want to come to this ice cream shop? Oh, because it's a hot day. Okay, because it's a hot day, people want to have an ice cream, and that's why they're buying ice creams. So just playing around with just that commercial awareness and kind of, you might ask yourself the question, this person here, do you think they've got a job, or do they own this ice cream truck? Do you think it's their business, and what sort of products do they have to buy in order to run this business, depending on the age, right?
Of course, yeah.
Just introducing that idea of, okay, you've got to buy ice cream and you've got to buy cones and you've got to put that together and then you sell it. So they're just kind of seeing behind the scenes a little bit of a layer of how things are working. Using some language around entrepreneurship. So, for example, if a child wants a puppy, you can talk about, well, how are you going to pitch the family that it's a good idea to have a puppy? Are you going to do some slide presentations? Would you be able to put together a schedule of who's going to walk the dog? All of these kind of things. So anything that a kid wants, you can actually use that as an opportunity to pitch the idea and to use the language of, why don't you pitch that? So I want to have an Xbox. Well, here's my objections to having an Xbox. Let's make a list of all of my objections, and then let's see if you can present me with your answer to those objections. And I want you to come back and present me with a presentation as to why you think that you can handle those objections. So little things like that, just slowing the game down and seeing if you can interject a few of those things in there. I've got very young kids, so one of the most valuable things that I teach them is a sentence called "the fun part's building it, not having it." So when they're working with Legos, there's 3 of them. So they're working with Legos, they're building some sort of a tower or some creation, and then one of the other ones sits on it and bang, the whole thing is broken, and then the upset, the crying and all that sort
accusations.
Of stuff. Yeah, exactly. So the reflex statement that I've brought in with my kids is, kids, the fun part's building it, not having it. Now you've got the opportunity to rebuild it. You get to build it again. It's not fun having Lego, it's fun building Lego. And so we reinforce this. It's amazing how often this becomes relevant. Like, it's almost a weekly occurrence that the fun part is building it, not having it. And what's interesting about that is that, my kids are going to live in a world where disruption is just going to happen again and again and again. They're going to create something. The rug will be pulled out from under them. They'll create and disrupt and create and disrupt. And that'll be the norm for their career. Every 4 or 5 years, some massive disruption will come through and they'll have to start from scratch. And if they believe that the fun part's building it, not having it, then they'll get on with that and they'll be okay with that. They'll learn to surf the waves of change. I've had the experience myself of sitting down with thousands of entrepreneurs. I've sat down with people who are still getting over stuff that happened 10 years ago. I've sat down with entrepreneurs who say, well, let me tell you about my story. I was going really, really well, and then I got sick and I got a divorce, and then this happened, and then the business closed, and it's been really hard. How long ago did that happen? Oh, in 2007. It's like there's been $50 billion startups happened
in the interim. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just get on with it. So the idea that the fun part's building it, not having it, is a useful idea to pack into their head pretty young,
pretty early.
Yeah. And then the other one too is just being aware of some of the main shortcomings of school. So, for example, the worst thing you can be called in school is disruptive. The best thing that Entrepreneur Magazine or Inc. Magazine could call you is disruptive.
Yeah.
So letting kids know that it's okay to be disruptive in the world, and the teacher's trying to run a class, and that's why they don't like disruption. But actually, it's good that you're a disruptive person. Being a disruptive person isn't necessarily a bad thing, but let's have an understanding about what's going on at school versus what's going on in the real world. And let's respect that the teacher's doing a difficult job, but also that being a disruptive person is hugely valuable. So having little things like that, teaching kids that getting the smart kid to do the homework is actually a really great life skill. Outside of school, that's not cheating. That's actually really smart. In fact, the CEO gets a CFO. They don't do the homework themselves. They don't
Delegation. Yeah,
they delegate. And they're specifically identifying who is the most talented person to do this work, and then they pass it on to that person. So acknowledging that when a kid thinks of that as an idea, that you should actually say, that's an idea that will serve you really well in life. In the particular situation that you're going through right now, you've got to be able to acquire enough skills to be able to know enough about a topic to be able to spot talent. So you're going through a phase of learning, which is about individual learning. But what you're doing is not cheating. You're actually doing something that's very intelligent, right? It's what you should be thinking about. So these are some of the things that that we cover in the book, and it's just how to have some of those difficult conversations. And there's some ideas that immediately seem obvious, and you go, oh, well, I should have always been telling my kids about that. That's really cool. And then you can kind of go and backtrack, and kids are so receptive to it. A lot of this entrepreneurial stuff, even if you left it really late, like you got kids who are 16, 17, you can have some of these conversations, and suddenly they're just, they're like, they realize that it relates to money and success, and they want it, They're driven. They're like, okay, teach me more about that. Why haven't you told me this before? So
it's true. Yeah, it's funny, and you notice it in their personalities. My daughters, my teenage daughters, they're so different from one another. One of them is super social and has over 1,000 followers on her Instagram already. Then another one is super academic, and she's the brain box who's kind of going to get the straight A's in all of her exams and stuff. And then there's the disruptor who is she wants to be a YouTuber. She wants to do all this kind of stuff. And you can see their personalities, and it's not about like molding one of them into the same, it's letting each of them go in their kind of direction.
Yeah. And one of the cool things is that you can find entrepreneurs who are super successful, who are similar to each of their personalities. So potentially a great activity is showing them people like themselves who have done really well. And you can say, the extrovert, let's have a look at Oprah Winfrey's story. The introvert, let's go and have a look at, one of the female CEOs who's behind the scenes but running a really tight ship. So you can go through and actually have a look at. There's so many great examples.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Tell me, on that topic, Daniel, one of the questions I like to ask my guests is, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self now if you had an opportunity?
Here's the thing. I don't have an opportunity, so I'll think about. I'm quite happy with the way things worked out, and if I was going to go back and talk to my 20-year-old self, I'd say go to Harvard, meet Mark Zuckerberg, lend him as much money as you possibly can. But hindsight's 2020. But more to the point, what advice would I give to a 20-year-old? And I talk about be brave, have fun, make a dent. So be brave is get outside the comfort zone as much as possible. Have fun, follow passion, follow enthusiasm. Use passion and purpose as a clue that that there's something there. And then make a dent. Do something that has impact on others, and do something that's meaningful and that has great impact. And I would probably encourage entrepreneurship. So become an entrepreneurial apprentice. Go and work for people who inspire you for 2 to 4 years. And I don't know where I would have learned this stuff had I not done 2 years as an apprentice. I would really encourage 20-somethings to go and work in a small startup as a first part of their career. One of the reasons for that is if you go and work at Accenture, you're going to see a very small part of a business. You're going to be in some little tiny pocket doing a tiny thing. You might be an accounts receivable clerk in some thing. You got no idea what's actually happening out there in the business. If you work in a company that has less than 50 employees, you know exactly what's happening with that business. You can see what the salespeople are selling and how many order forms come in, and you can see what's getting delivered, and you can meet with the CEO. If you want to have a coffee with the CEO, you can have a coffee with the CEO. If you don't understand something, it's very easy to figure it out. But you get this holistic view of the organization. And big organizations are obviously just fractals of small organizations. Mm-hmm. So by working in a small organization first, you end up, even if you do go down the career path working for a bigger company, you have this kind of innate knowledge of what how businesses function, and how value gets created in the engine. So yeah, and the other major advice for 20-somethings is just read a book every month. Read biographies, just get in and read that good content. Get yourself a mentor, ask them what to read, and read good books.
Great advice.
And party.
Enjoy yourself.
Party. No one says and party. And party. Like, you're only going to be in your 20s one time, and you're constantly going to be looking back and say, did I make the most of my 20s? Like, there's going to be plenty of time for Ferraris. There's going to be, you can spend the rest of your life pursuing houses, cars, and, fame and fortune. But there's only a very small window where you don't look like a fool standing up on a podium in a nightclub, throwing yourself around. So get up there on the podium.
Yeah. Good advice. Daniel, I'm respectful of your time. Just if people wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
So I'm on all the social media, but the other thing too is my best thinking is in my books. So a great place to start is there's 4 best-selling books in the Entrepreneur Journey series. So there's Entrepreneur Revolution, which is about the times that we live in and how to make the most of them. There's Key Person of Influence around personal brand. Oversubscribed is campaigns, promotions, marketing. And 24 Assets is building a robust business that has intellectual property at its core, and that that's scalable and stable. So those are the 4 books. They actually unfold in a sequence. It's the Harry Potter of entrepreneurship books. Mm-hmm. Jump into any of them that grabs you and have a read. And if anyone wants to actually get a free copy of Key Person of Influence, email info@dent.global. And just let us know where you are. We'll either send you a PDF if it's hard to mail you a copy, or if you're easy to mail you a copy, we'll put one in the mail for you and physically send you a copy of Key Person of Influence, just as a way to get started.
Brilliant. Thanks. Well, I'm going to put a link to the books in the show notes for this podcast anyway. But Daniel, it's been a real pleasure, and some great advice there, and wishing you all the best, and we'll speak soon.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Daniel Priestley. He's a really, really nice chap, and also just he's a very authentic kind of guy, and you wouldn't know, just when you kind of meet him and stuff like that, you would not know he is as successful as he is. He's actually quite down to earth, and he doesn't have a lot of the kind of the bullshit that you kind of see around people that are doing really, really well. So I really have a lot of time for Daniel. Anyway, that's it for episode number 53 of Behind the Facade. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my number one ask is to leave a review or share this episode with someone you think would benefit from it. In the show notes, you'll find various things discussed today. And if you have any other questions or topics you would like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via my Facebook group, Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, look for me in social media using the handle Gavin J. Gallagher. And that includes YouTube, where I have my new YouTube channel. Lastly, you can stay up to date with the various events and challenges I'm working on by adding your name to my email list over at gavinjgallagher.com/go. All right, folks, that's it for now. I will see you again next week.